Æthelflæd was nearly 30 when her father died. She had watched him rule all her life. She was born around the year 870, just as the great heathen army was invading the eastern coast of Britain. The oldest child of the King of Wessex, Alfred, and his Mercian-born wife, Æthelflæd, they had ensured she was learned, on a par with her younger brother, Edward. Their father now dead, Edward, not Æthelflæd, would rule the Kingdom of Wessex. She had left home half her life ago. Betrothed to the Lord of Mercia, she had ruled alongside him as lady. Æthelred had been under Alfred's control, and with the marriage, her father cemented a relationship that would enable him to rule as king of the Anglo-Saxons. After the marriage, Lord and Lady embarked on a project to restore the old Roman cities of Chester, Gloucester and Worcester, as well as founding a series of burh towns, an important defensive strategy which they hoped would keep the Danes away. Mercia once stretched further eastwards, but the Danes had taken much of the land during the reign of her husband's predecessor, Ceolwulf. Their wish was to more justly govern the people in both spiritual and temporal matters. It's not clear whether they acted alone in this or whether Edward was overseeing as king. What's fairly certain is that around 9 towns were either built or refortified by Lord and Lady. It would seem her husband was considerably older than Æthelflæd, and during the early years of the 10th century he became incapacitated through illness or injury. They had a daughter, Eofwin, but no son, so it's likely Æthelflæd began to take on more of the governing. Though she bore no son, she would raise one. Edward sent to her his illegitimate son for her to care for and shape into a man. Aethelstan would become the first king of the English. By 907, the Norse-Irish Vikings had made incursions into the northwest of Mercia, near modern-day Wirral. Under treaty, Æthelflæd had allowed them to settle there, but soon after they attacked the ancient city of Chester. She led an army in defence. She defended the city in person and defeated the Vikings with tenacity and resourcefulness. She tipped the city's beehives on the attackers and set fire to a wood where she had trapped a Viking force inside. Although not all chroniclers attributed the rebuilding of the city to Æthelflæd, Henry of Huntingdon doesn't say who it was. An Irish source describes the city's walls being refortified by the Lady of the Mercians. In 911, Lord Æthelred died. The Worcester Chronicle reports, Æthelred, a man of outstanding probity, alderman and noble ruler, lord and underling of the Mercians, died after performing many good deeds. After his death, his wife Æthelflæd, the daughter of King Alfred, held the kingdom of the Mercians most vigorously and for a considerable period of time. Æthelflæd must have believed her reign over. Surely her brother Edward would install an alderman to rule Mercia for him. However, as the Worcester Chronicle points out, Edward left his sister in charge, a sign that he perhaps saw her as more capable than any of the alternatives. He was clearly happy to work alongside his sister, who was less likely to be disloyal to Wessex, the kingdom of her birth. It wasn't unheard of for a woman to rule in Anglo-Saxon society, but it was certainly rare. What's unclear is whether she wielded a sword as leader of an army. If she did, her reign becomes unprecedented. What's also not clear is how much of the decision-making was solely done by Æthelflæd, or if she was being advised by the men of the Mercian court. The sources tell us she consulted her friends at the Mercian court, which surely means she took advice from time to time. But did she take on the traditional role of an Anglo-Saxon ruler? Regardless, daughter and son of King Alfred now ruled his kingdom. The Mercian Register focuses heavily on her building projects and styles her as Lady of the Mercians. Perhaps her finest achievement to this point was the retaking of Tamworth in 913. The Mercian Chronicle tells us, "In this year, by the grace of God, Æthelflæd, Lady of the Mercians, went with all the Mercians to Tamworth and built the borough there in the early summer. Tamworth had been the location of the old Mercian assemblies up to the 850s when it fell into Viking hands. The mighty King Offa had had his residence there. By this one act, she had restored the royal residence of Mercia and with it dealt a blow to the Vikings, a significant turning point in the defence of eastern Mercia. Her focus for building from the year 913 to around 915 were primarily focused along the Welsh border. She refurbished the Iron Age hill fort at Edesbury, near Delamere Forest in Cheshire, and a large fort at Sherbury, near the River Camlad, and Offa's Dyke. Further north, Weirdburh was founded during this time, and served as a mint during subsequent reigns, dying out during the 16th century. But perhaps her most strategic project during this flurry of building was the burh at Runcorn. Situated at the narrow part of the River Mersey, it was intended to block Vikings sailing up the river from the Irish Sea. All of this defensive work laid the foundations for what was to come next: attack. In 917, after a bitter winter which had a devastating effect on the livelihood of her people, she launched an attack by sending an army to Derby. The Mercian Register tells us, Æthelflæd, Lady of the Mercians, obtained the borough which is called Derby, and all that belongs to it. This was perhaps her finest achievement. A huge victory for the Mercians and the Saxons, it also demonstrated the extent of her talent as a competent leader in war. The Mercian Register continues, and there also 4 of her thanes, who were most dear to her, were killed within the gates. To be included in the register, these thanes must have been very important people to her, and she must have felt their loss deeply. Soon after the capture of Derby, the Danes of East Anglia submitted to Edward, and the following year the Danes of Leicester to Æthelflæd, without a fight. Interestingly, the Northumbrians in York sent messages swearing allegiance to Æthelflæd, not Edward. A later source even suggests she personally led a force to the banks of the River Tyne, near modern-day Newcastle, to help the King of the Scots repel an army of Vikings. It's clear at this point that she was at the height of her powers. So, as all good stories go, in mid-918 she died suddenly at Tamworth. The information of her death comes from 3 chronicles, and they're a bit vague in regards to what she actually died of. The Mercian Chronicle. She died 12 days before midsummer in Tamworth, in the 8th year in which with lawful authority she was holding dominion over the Mercians, and her body is buried in Gloucester in the East Chapel of St. Peter's Church. The Annals of Ulster describe her as most famous queen of the Saxons, and the Welsh Chronicle of Princes also describes her as a queen. Her final resting place in Gloucester is thought to be St. Oswald's Priory, which was formerly St. Peter's, and she is thought to be laid next to her husband alongside the bones of the saint, a prestigious position. William of Malmesbury, writing in the 12th century, states that her tomb was discovered during the early part of that century and perhaps moved. In the 1970s, archaeologists digging at St. Oswald's discovered a fragment of a highly decorated tomb cover. They dated it to the 10th century. It's certainly possible that this could have belonged to Æthelflæd's tomb. After her death, the kingdom of Mercia passed into the charge of her now adult daughter, Æthelflæd. This is the only instance in British history of a daughter succeeding a mother. The new lady of the Mercians, however, did not rule for long. By the end of 919, she had been deposed by her uncle Edward and was taken into Wessex. Nothing for sure is known of her after this, though she perhaps entered a convent. Some 30 years later, the Queen Mother is recorded supporting a religious woman named Æthelflæd. Æthelflæd's legacy is an impressive one. She ruled for over 30 years in an age of constant threat from the Vikings. The 8 years of sole rule saw expansion of the Mercian kingdom, and she seems to have had the love of her people. It is strange, then, that she was almost completely written out of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Written in 930, Her reign is not mentioned save for her death as sister of King Edward, not the first or the last woman whose deeds have been written out of history. The writers of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle clearly wished to give a Wessex-heavy view of things, and if it wasn't for the fragmentary Mercian Chronicle, we would know even less about this remarkable woman.